What is your identity? How are you defined? What are the characteristics, or what are your perceived characteristics, right? Remember, I'm a teacher, not a speaker. Let's go back in history real quick, back to the mid to late 1800s. In California, you had a lot of miners out there. They were looking for gold. And one thing that they found was this right here. Maybe kind of hard to see, but this is known as iron pyrite, AKA fool's gold. So these miners were looking for gold, but while they were digging, sometimes they would strike this and they would get excited because they see the glimmer and they instantly thought about the value, but then they found out that what they discovered was not actually gold. Like I said, it's iron pyrite, it's fool's gold. So how do you know the difference? If you were to look at gold, it looks almost identical to this in its natural state. I mean, it has a luster and shine, it's solid, so you would think it's gold. However, there are different things to help us fully determine the identity of iron pyrite, fool's gold, and real gold. One of them is density. If I wanted to determine the density, that is a physical property of matter, right? If I wanted to determine the density of a substance, I would need two things. I would need the mass of that substance and the volume of that substance. If I get the mass, if that's determined, and I divide that by the volume, the amount of that substance that you have, it's going to give me a number. That number is so specific, it's almost like a fingerprint, right? So real gold has a density of 19.3 grams per cubic centimeters, whereas iron pyrite only have a density of 5 grams per cubic centimeters. And there's other things. Real gold has a property known as being ductile, meaning it could be made into wire, or it's malleable. It could be flattened down. If I were to hit iron pyrite with a hammer right now, sparks will come up from it. It's gonna shatter. If I were to try to melt it, it's gonna produce a foul smelling gas. But if I hit real gold with the hammer, it's just gonna start to flatten. It's gonna start to bend. If I try to burn it or melt it, it's not gonna produce a foul smell. So even though they look very similar, if I calculate the density, that's one of the things I could use to identify and distinguish iron pyrite, fool's gold, and real gold. So our identity is important. You know, our perceived identity is important as well. Our identity can be connected to our habits, and our habits are connected also to our behavior. So in order for us to be successful or achieve what we want to reach or do what we want to do, we need to identify the different habits of success. Whatever you want to be successful in, not focusing on the result, but focus on the person that you have to be to achieve those results, right? There was this scenario that James Clear mentioned in his book, Atomic Habits, and he mentioned there was two individuals. So the first individual was offered a cigarette. Now they both want to stop, right? So the first individual was offered a cigarette and they say, "No, thank you, I'm trying to quit." The second individual who was offered says, "No, thanks, not a smoker." Even though they both gave a good response, the one that said, "No, thanks, I'm trying to quit," they still identified as a smoker that was struggling, whereas the one that says, "No thanks, not a smoker," even though that was very basic, it didn't appear to be a big difference, but because the identity of a smoker was removed from the second person that said, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker," you know, their identity was more solid. So they were able to overcome what they were struggling with, which was success for them, right? Some other characteristics that we could focus on, once again, focus on those characteristics of somebody who is successful, and not necessarily the outcome, but focus on being the person, right? If you want to be able to write a book, what is something about somebody who writes a book? There's somebody that's reliable and consistent, right? So if you focus on being reliable and consistent, guess what? And you improve those skills, you'll be more likely to finish writing a book. So adopt those habits, right? You want to identify the habits that are associated with success, because that's when our behavior is going to change. So focus on becoming the successful person and not necessarily the results. For example, I could focus on running a marathon, or I could focus on simply being a runner. Okay, if I focus on being the best runner, then a marathon kind of comes with the territory. You know, if I want to once again even write a book, and I'm just bringing that back because I mentioned James Clear. James Clear never considered himself a guru when it came to the English language, but what he did do was focus on the consistent habit of writing a weekly blog. And after writing that weekly blog for about 2 or 3 years, that gave him the skill set that he needed. He identified as a writer, and then he went on to writing the book Atomic Habits, which is a top-selling book. So just know that we need to focus on the identifying the habits and putting those habits into place, because that's what leads to a change in our character. So we have to put forth those action steps. And whenever we take actions, think of that like we're casting a vote. And we're casting a vote. Now, whenever you have an election, right, it doesn't have to be unanimous in order to win. You just need a majority of the votes to go in that direction. So if you're trying to lose weight, like for me, today is day, I think, 388. Okay, I am not a supreme athlete, and maybe I didn't say that right, but I'm working towards it. I'm developing the habits and creating an identity to have the rise and grind mentality, the rise and grind identity. And since that's starting to be pumped almost into my DNA and into my structure, into my personal philosophy, it becomes second nature. I could go to the gym a couple times a week or whatever, but when I start to move in the direction of being more consistent, that's when I'm going to see results. So the focus is on not necessarily the results, but becoming the person that you need to be, not the outcome. If we do not focus on that, we're just like a boat moving with no rudder, no real direction. We have to become the identity. Don't focus on what you want to achieve. Focus on what you want to become. Do you want to be iron pyrite, fool's gold? Or do you want to be a real thing? Remember, I'm a teacher, not a speaker. Let's focus on narrowing down and clearly defining our identity, and we establish that through our habits, which will lead to the changed behavior. Y'all have an amazing day.